So welcome everybody today. So the aim of today is that we share where we're up to with the Net Zero Terrace Street project. Kate will give an overview of what it's about. We'll have opportunity for questions about the scheme, and then we'll go into a bit of a deeper dive to show you some of the depth of the work that's been going on, whereby it will get quite technical and complicated, but we don't want to sort of overwhelm you with information, but we want to show you what we've been working on and what's behind it, and talk about what we're doing next. And it will be simplified. I wanted to reassure you that it will not be that complicated to clients or people in houses. And then what we'll do is be an over to you on what you're doing and how we can be easy to work with and how we can work together to roll this out so it's not a flash in the pan, nice innovation project that sits in one place, never to be replicated again, which is frankly a bit of a waste of money and everybody's time. So, Kate, if you want to start, do you want to share the slides? And I'd encourage you all, if you have questions, pop your hand up, and then we'll take the questions as we go along. If we get bogged down, I'll move us on a little bit and we can come back to them. So feel free, and I'll keep an eye on Q&A. If you want to put questions into the chat, please do so. We'll take a break about 11:30. Okay, Kate, over to you.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
We can, but it's not in display mode.
I'll just put it in slideshow. Okay. That means, can I still see? I can't see people coming in now, though, Helen. So I don't know whether you could admit. Oh, actually, I can still do it there. Great. Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming this morning. I'm Kate Gilmartin, so I'm a volunteer director at Rosendale Valley Energy, alongside Julie, who's on the call. And there's another Tricia and Derek and Amaryllis, but they're not on this call. And I'm also, this is a volunteer job, and my day job is I'm chief exec at the British Hydropower Association, and I'm also director with Community Energy England as well. So let me just. Okay, so just a bit of an agenda. So who we are, why are we doing what we're doing, what's the concept of what we're doing, what we want to achieve in terms of the model that we're developing in Rossendale, how can that be standardised and replicated and scaled, where we're up to, what our next steps are, and how we want to work with others and share the learning so that scale can take place. So we are a community benefit society, Rossendale Valley Energy, so therefore not-for-profit group, and we are aiming to support that transition to net zero, and we're doing this through the projects that we've worked on to date, and really kind of bringing forward a coalition of the willing. So you can see all the different logos there of the people we're working with in various different funded projects, which I'll go into a little bit later. But I would kind of really highlight the fact that this is a coalition of the willing. You know, people recognise the fact that we've got millions of homes that haven't got a route to net zero, and often those homes, those terrace homes, are in the areas of most deprivation that need to have affordable energy and healthy warm homes as well. And also a key aim of what we want to try and do is obviously decarbonising the area, but actually bringing the supply chain, keeping it local, bringing those jobs and skills to local areas, not just because of the economic benefits, but also in terms of accountability as well, and making sure that as we have an operational system in the future, we've got those key jobs and skills to help keep it functional and operating well. So the problem we've got, well, there are 10 million terraced homes in the UK. We think about 6 million of those are 2 to 3 bed accommodation. So actually, if you look at the picture of one of the streets in Bacup, you can see that there's not really very much room for an outside air source heat pump. And often these houses are built in 19th, 20th century and have low energy efficiency. As I just mentioned, often when you layer these terrace houses on a GIS map, you see that they are also in areas of deprivation. So fuel poverty is an issue, and affordability of any kind of low carbon technologies is also a big issue. we've worked with Borough Huppold. I'll talk about the projects we've worked on, but we've looked at feasibility for other types of decarbonisation, and really the default choice in these areas and lots of other areas are for decarbonisation would be electrification using electric boilers, which are quite cheap to put in, but they're really expensive to run, and therefore it's not addressing the issue of fuel poverty. And also, if we think about moving from gas and electrifying heat, we're putting huge amounts of load on the grid, especially that kind of peak tea time winter load, which is a big problem in terms of how our grid can respond and what we need to upgrade and the costs of upgrading, and also the time barriers of upgrading as well. So our starting point of what this kind of net zero terrace street solution is really kind of standing on a street and going, okay, if I knocked on that door, what do I need to say for someone to go, okay, I'm interested, and not just close the door? So really, it was kind of reverse engineering what the offer has to be if we're going to try and get traction. And really, it's that black box in the diagram there. So we have to have a no upfront cost to householders, because we've just mentioned affordability is a really big barrier. We've got to do the retrofit as well. We've got to do fabric, because we've got to address the energy efficiency of our leaky, very old homes, and we've got to make them healthy and warm. We're looking at shared ambient loop, which again is more efficient than an air source heat pump. So we're building in additional efficiencies within the system. And we've got to address power. So we've got the problem between the gas prices and the electricity prices, sometimes referred to as the spark gap, whereby taking people off gas and moving them onto electric heat means that actually it's really hard to lower their bill. And oftentimes we find that the bills are going to go up. So to rectify this problem, we have to look at subsidising the price of power, and another complexity to add into this mix. So we're looking at things like community renewable cooperatives, so community-owned solar on factories nearby, also rooftop PV on the houses themselves. But how do we actually reduce that cost of power? So those are our underlying principles. And really, if we can't achieve those 4 aims, then we can't achieve affordable low carbon energy and healthy warm homes. And we failed in our objective and would have to start again. So we always go back to those fundamental principles. And if we can't do that, then we're not going to have a solution. So what is the solution that we're looking at? Well, I think the first thing to say is that we're creating a community-based approach. So how we do this collectively, because then we get the economies of scale, and we also help people have that safety in numbers, moving as part of the crowd rather than people having that fear of the unknown. So it's all about creating that whole systems community approach. I mentioned the work that we did with Borough Huppold right at the get-go, and the solution that they came up as the most feasible, efficient solution was to look at shared ground loops. So the picture on the right-hand side is a picture from Kenza. You might well have seen the Heat the Streets project that they did in Stithians, which is a whole off-gas grid community looking at decarbonising as one. They've worked with social housing for a very long time, putting in these shared ground loops for over a decade. So a borehole is about 150, maybe 200 metres deep, and they're clustered together. So ideally, you put this infrastructure in the street across a cluster of terraced houses. It's more efficient than an air source heat pump, and of course a lot more efficient than an electric boiler. So comparative to the counterfactual of either one of those, we're making savings across the system. What we're also trying to do is introduce a smart local energy system, which is another really big complex area of the project. But the idea is that we have to try and lower the price of energy for people, and this is trying to create an energy club, so people will opt in. And essentially what we're trying to do is have their house connected across the aggregation of other houses, being able to talk across those houses to each other, and be able to load shift and balance and optimize and kind of sell that benefit on as flexibility to the national grid. So a bit like Octopus does at the moment, or you might get a text message if you're part of a scheme that says, can you turn things off now? But what we're focusing on here is many of the things like Octopus Agile tariff, they are available for people who are able to pay, so they're able to afford solar and battery and maybe EV, and able to play, so they are interested in load shifting themselves. So what we're addressing here is the people who are unable to pay and unlikely to play. So we're kind of trying to automate as much of that as possible for the collective benefit of those aggregated houses, that community. I think a key point of what we're trying to achieve is how we finance everything. So because we're putting infrastructure in the street and we're doing the retrofit for the houses, we're putting all the debt onto those boreholes, because infrastructure can lever debt. And then we're asking people to pay sign a connection agreement, and then they would pay a standing charge. So it's very much like how we've paid for the national grid and our national gas grid over the years. And I've mentioned the key is obviously affordable, low carbon energy, healthy, warm homes at no upfront cost to consumers. And that's kind of our mantra. And it's just worth noting that within that mantra, which is kind of our strap line, we don't really mention carbon, because this is about social justice and energy equality. But we find that actually, if you start talking about climate change and carbon, it can be very divisive. And we're very concerned that actually we don't want to have trollers kind of jumping on and criticizing us for our carbon climate agenda, rather than the fact that this is about healthy, warm homes and energy equality. Sorry, Louisa, do you have your hand up then?
I just wanted to say, if you're not muted, if you could mute, because I heard somebody sneeze, and there's some noises, so mute away, please. Sorry, Kate.
No, thank you. And just saying, I think please do put questions in the chat, or feel free to put your hand up and jump in if there's something you need explaining. So it's not just me talking at you. So yeah, happy to take your thoughts as we go along. So just in terms of the funding and the project process to date, so this started with a community renewal fund application probably about 3 years ago now. We're working with Phil at Borough Huppold and Community Energy South, and looking at technical feasibility of other solutions. So we looked at mine water heating, we looked at a central heat network, and we ruled those out as things that weren't going to be appropriate to this community and aren't going to be appropriate for lots of other communities as well, due to space constraints or land constraints. So we're not saying that this is the only solution. We're saying that for a lot of houses, this is a useful, replicable solution. But if you happen to be next to a reservoir and water source heat pump is going to be appropriate for your community, then do look at other options. We also looked at what the retrofit solution would be as well in terms of retrofit design, and we also did some mapping for local renewable energy generation options as well, because as I mentioned, it's key to have local generation that can help subsidise the power price. We then applied for the Pathfinder Places, which is all about non-technical solutions and how you support local authorities on how to actually develop this. Because as you probably know, the bigger local authorities, GMCA, Bristol, they're going great guns. They've got big teams, they've got big resources, and they're coming up with big frameworks to make decarbonisation happen. But if you're Rossendale Valley Energy or Ribble Valley or lots of other smaller local authorities who don't have that resource, then it's a really big problem of how you can help your communities decarbonise. So under that funding, we did a lot around the engagement methodology, and we worked with Andy and John at Centre for Energy Quality to help develop the Fairer Warmth app, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And we started to think about what the organisation and operation of all this kind of community-based systems would look like. So what are all the moving parts and how do they start to fit together? We then were successful with discovery funding for a strategic innovation fund, so working with Electricity Northwest and Northern Power Grid to think about how this solution works at the substation level and how it could potentially be replicated across other substations. And then also working with Share Energy on a grant that we got for looking at the solar cooperative as well. So just mentioning those moving parts, I think it's really key to identify them. I've got a diagram that I'll show you after this, but I think it's key in my mind to separate everything out and see where they all fit together. So I think we've got the physical infrastructure. So we've already talked about the boreholes and the retrofit and the things that are going to go in houses. So whether that's a wet system, upgrading radiators, etc., whether that's solar on roofs, whether that's smart water cylinders and things that are in the street. So everything that is physical and that we can leave a debt onto and for. And then a big part of the project is how we create demand for the solution. So how do we engage the community? What does it have to be? It has to be a kind of no-brainer offer that is community centric, that is based in co-productive ethos, where because if we're not going to get critical mass, if we're not going to get buy-in, then we're not going to get rollout. So we're doing a lot of work with Louise thinking about, well, what's that consumer journey from the first knock on the door to what's this look like when it's operational? What's it look like in 20 years when it's still operational? So a lot around that kind of community work. And then the third moving part is the virtual infrastructure. So that's everything that's in the cloud, basically. So that's the smart local energy system and how that interacts with A, people, and B, the physical infrastructure. So what are those interfaces and how they need to operate together? And going back to that point about creating least hassle for people. Octopus Agile is there for energy geeks who like playing. Most people are too busy. They've got kids, they've got jobs, and actually they just want best value and they want to know that someone's looking out for their best interests, and that's that kind of community model. And that talks about the organizational and operational structure, which is the bit that sits in the middle and hangs all these different moving parts off it. So what's that organization look like? How do we retain that community benefit, not just today, but what are those future community benefits, and how do we make sure they are not extracted and the community never sees those future benefits as well? So how do we create an organization that makes sure that that's retained for the long term for the community and has the objective of always trying to lower bills rather than extract profit? And then how do all these moving pieces sit together and how do they interact in development, in deployment, and in operation? So lots of things to think about. And then what we've got to do is we've got to make this very comprehensive, not just for engagement for people and households, but we've got to make it really comprehensive for investors as well. It's got to meet their due diligence requirements. And yes, it's got to be like other infrastructures, that it's got to be there for 40 years. And what's that look like? So this is kind of a diagram of those moving parts. So over on the left, we've got the physical infrastructure, and a key part of how we deliver that infrastructure is how do we build that local supply chain and the jobs and skills locally that we'll need to build that supply chain and to deploy. And I think the point about this project is we can create it into a planned, phased, planned phase coordinated approach. So we can actually target areas and say, right, okay, here's 2,000 houses. How many man hours is that going to take? What's the supply chain look like in our area? How can we build this? So rather than ad hoc piecemeal decarbonisation, this gives us a route, a pathway to decarbonise that can bring those other kind of local benefits along as well. At the bottom, we've got this kind of demand creation. So what's this mean to consumers? Obviously, we're working in Rossendale, but how do we go to a new community, a cold start community approach, or a fast follower community approach where people are already primed because they've already been working on local energy for a decade? So a couple of different approaches that we're thinking about there. We're obviously working with energy champions on the ground, and our backbone really is the Fair Warmth app, which John will talk about shortly, which is really our customer relationship management system, as well as being our way of engaging people as well. Then on the right hand side, that's where our virtual infrastructure is. So that's, as I said, it's all the things that are in the cloud that has to connect people and the physical infrastructure. So a lot around what the home energy management system is going to look like. And that's got to speak to the Fairer Warmth app, which is the window for the people. And then that's got to speak to the community energy management system, which is kind of a platform with software interfacing. So this is part of the Strategic Innovation Fund. And then how does that speak to the local substation as well? well. So all that's another kind of work stream. And then the bit in the middle, this is where all the organisational and operational stuff has to happen. So how does the talking to consumers, gathering energy data, work up towards our energy model and to our techno-economic model, which has to be due diligence approved by investors. So all this information has to link in together, because otherwise, if we don't have it all interlinked, working for consumers and for investors, we can't complete the model. I'll come back to that model later, but we'll have a bit of a pause. I'll just do a recap, and we'll do a bit of a pause for any questions. So as a recap, we're trying to create a solution that can unlock millions of homes that currently are stranded, because there aren't any policies right now for these houses. They aren't appropriate for the boiler upgrade scheme because they can't put an air source heat pump in because of space constraints, and they can't put a ground source heat pump in, and they can't put in a community collective scheme themselves without doing all this. And also the point about policy is we've got funding routes through centralised heat networks, so lots of money through the Green Heat Network Fund, but that we are not eligible for that funding. So all these millions of homes are falling between policy. There's a big policy gap. So we're trying to create demand through that community engagement model. We've got to mobilise people. We've got to mobilise the supply chain. The solution has to be homogenous, inclusive and accessible. So we've got to be able to knock on each door and have exactly the same solution. And it has to be delivered across mixed tenure. So it could be the same for private rented as for a homeowner. But the idea is that we're not pinning anything to the house itself. There's no debt, so you don't need to talk to your mortgage holder, etc. And it's no upfront cost. It has to be able to deliver affordable, low carbon energy and a healthy, warm home so that no one is left behind. It has to be replicable and scalable. So the learning we have here has to be lifted and shifted to other communities. And it has to help that planned phase coordinated approach, which can then feed into things like local area energy plans, and the work that the distribution network operators do through their distributed future energy scenarios, the DFES. It has to be able to support local authorities. So how can we work alongside them if they haven't got the resource to deliver this themselves? And it has to be able to deliver local jobs and skills. It needs to be able to be initiated by communities, third parties, or local authorities. And it's nothing new, apart from the SLES bit, which is kind of quite new. But in terms of the physical infrastructure, this has already been delivered. It's been delivered for over a decade with social housing. What we're doing is taking what social housing have done really well and transposing that onto these mixed tenure streets without the big funding pot that Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund has given. So it's fitting all those together, but in a community-centric model where the benefits are retained over the long term. We've got to overcome this spark gap, the difference between gas and electricity. So we've got to look at this local generation, local energy market. And what we're trying to do at the same time is kind of build this coalition of the willing. And really, we're trying to campaign as well at the same time to say to government, look, there's a big policy gap here. What's your plan for all these millions of terrace homes that don't have a route forward? So I think, Louise, have I missed anything on there? But yeah, maybe if I just unshare and people can pop in with any questions they might have.
Thank you so much, Kate. We've got Reese's hands up, and then we've got, I'll write it down. First Reese, then Sydney, and then there's one in the chat. So Reese, do you want to go ahead? And could you introduce yourselves when you're speaking as well, please, so we know who you are?
No problem. Yeah, Reese Williams. I work for SSE Networks. I'm an innovation project manager. Really interested in this because we do a lot of work with local authorities, the local area energy plans. So one of the hardest things is trying to figure out how do we decarbonize heat. We've had some initial discussions around ground source looped heat pumps. And one of the biggest obstacles which we're coming across at the moment for successful rollout comes down to finance. I know you're talking about a zero cost option for residents. In my mind, it's hard to visualize how that will be possible because and I'm hoping you can help me here, but let's say you've got 100 residents and they're all somewhat interested in a ground source looped heat pump. Many of those 100 residents some of them might have just put in a brand new boiler, a gas boiler, and they might all want to come on at different stages. So some people might be ready now, some people in a year, some people in 3 years. How do you get a zero cost option for everyone in that instance? Because the reason why I'm asking this is because I did have some initial conversations with some providers and they said, look, we just wouldn't take that risk unless everyone was ready at the same time. So yeah, that's my question.
Thank you, Reese. I think, can I just step in first? It's not zero cost. It's no upfront cost at the beginning of the process. And there is a cost. They will pay a standing charge and they'll still be paying their electricity bill, which will be controlling. But Kate, did you want to take that, or should?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so we're going to go into the deeper dive after these questions to look at the energy modelling and how we're doing that, because essentially it is all those moving parts that have to fit together to get us to that point of affordability. So things like the local generation being brought in as a local energy market. So it's all about those moving parts. They all have to work, and Phil's got quite a nice slide which will show how that equation balances in a way, and each community will be slightly different on what the moving parts are. But in terms of 100 houses, we think that we can deliver the solution with 30% critical mass. So the idea is that we're never going to get everybody signed up at the same time. You're going to get your early adopters, you're going to get your later adopters, you're going to get your laggards. So we've got to make it work with the early adopters, really. And we think we can do that on 30%, but ideally we need to lay out that infrastructure for everybody, because otherwise you're adding in further cost if you can't do that. So again, it will be different community by community. But yeah, the point is that it has to be no upfront cost.
There's also a cascading scaffolding effect that people describe. So Kenza describe a sort of ripple effect from uptake down a street, whereby if somebody at either end says, yep, I'm in, they see a ripple of people going, well, I have got a new gas boiler, but actually I want in anyway. So they see that uptake, and I think Adrian might have just put his hand up too, but we see that also on retrofit area schemes. So whilst we need a third, we might get more. So, but we'll come back to some of the thinking and modelling on that. Can I take Sydney next? Has that answered your question? Sorry, Reese.
Yes, it did. I'm still looking forward to Phil's
we'll give you
presentation
more
later as well. Thanks.
Sydney, can I bring you in? Hi there.
Yeah, I'm Sydney Charles. I'm in North London and doing a campaign against the heat network from the Edmonton incinerator for many reasons that I won't go into here. Maybe you know them, I don't know. But my question is, do you have a message or an ask for the heat zoning consultation that's out at the moment? Just to mention that has got gates in it that they're suggesting of carbon dioxide per kilowatt, which seems to be the crucial thing. And well, I'm thinking the ones from the incinerator would fail that. But just generally speaking, are you engaging with that consultation to try and push your points?
It is on my radar, Sydney, and I will try and get a response in from Rossendale Valley Energy if I get a chance. But yeah, at the moment, heat zoning's only for commercial commercial outfits, so it doesn't apply to domestic. It would be
yeah, but maybe that's the message you could put in.
Well, yes, I think what I will say is I'll use this as an example of how it could be applied to residential areas. So for instance, if we've put the infrastructure in a street in its entirety and we've got 30% of people uptake, and then you have a private landlord whose tenant's gas boiler breaks, we want to persuade them that it's going to be the best option is to actually connect to the infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, I think politically heat zoning hasn't gone near residential for a reason, but yeah, I'll try and get to that point, Sydney.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And oh, the guy from DESNES did come and did give a presentation to the heat group for the Community Energy England heat group as well. We gave him a grilling. I've got a question here from Harry Barros. What planning permits and other regulatory hoops would a project have to go through, and what is the likelihood of being blocked or successful in those processes? So we've got in some areas there would be a planning application, for example, with external wall insulation. That could go in as a group application to the planning. And in somewhere like Rossendale, which is the local planning authority as a district, that would go to Rossendale Borough Council. So that would go through the planning development process. And as part of the co-production process, that would be talked about early on in the phases or in the project plan, so that we have had early talks with the council's planners about what they want to see, what's acceptable, conservation areas, and so on. And some of Baker is a heritage area. There are some listed and conservation streets, and part of Valley Heritage, who are also involved in this, their motivation is how do we decarbonise terrace streets, stone terraces in a thoughtful way that maintains that historic heritage look. Secondly, we would have to have highways permits for drilling and trenching in the street to lay the infrastructure. So that comes from the Highways Authority. And Kent's Scythian scheme successfully got permit for that to install in the street rather than in sort of back of people's gardens and so on, which they also did. So those are the two main sort of council planning elements. Other regulatory hoops, I think, will be hoops which are along the lines of standard for retrofit, which is more of a choice, to be honest, past 2030, 2035, and then abiding by the heat code in terms of contracts and so on. Have I covered everything, Kate?
Yes, I think so. Just to say that working with Chipping, which is an off-gas rural community just northeast of Preston, and they have put planning permission in for 11 boreholes for a cluster, and that is a conservation area as well. So they have had to put planning permission in, but otherwise, yeah.
So we would relay the cobbles. I lived in a cobbled street area. When anyone digs anything up, we're all on it to check they're not tarmacking, and those cobbles are taken out and put back. And I think the chance of them being blocked is interesting too, because a collaborative and planned partnership approach on this kind of project means you bring the right people in early and talk about how to do this. So you hopefully don't hit the sort of somebody in highways going, oh, I don't know what this is, I'm not going to allow it. So that very early on in the process, we've cascaded that through so that we're not going to hopefully hit a block of somebody being difficult in planning, for example, because they're bought in. And councils have got very tough targets to hit by way of decarbonisation. So it is in their interest to work with the group and be part of this partnership. So that's that question, Harry. Guy Somerville, your hand was up, and then after you, Adrian. So Guy.
Hang on. Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Actually, it was much the question that Reese asked actually about funding. I'm with Chiltern Green Energy Foundation, a KIC, and we seem to spend so much time chasing money and going in for bids that get turned down that it makes everything more or less something that'll be beyond my lifetime at the rate we're going. And the other thing we found is a lot of it we coordinate with Durham University. They had plans to put using the mine water, got plenty of mine water in Durham, but there was never a business model around it. It was always based on your heating being dependent on grants every year. Well, nobody was going to take that sort of risk at the time. And that's one of the things. But I think, Reese, if there's something later about it, that might answer all the questions I was going to ask anyway about funding.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, Louise. Yes, absolutely, Guy. I feel your pain. We've done lots of funding applications, and we've been really lucky with them actually. But I'll talk a bit more about funding applications in a bit. But the idea with this model is that we will try and we're trying to create a non-grant dependent model. So, you know, but we've got to basically entice patient capital, which is pension funds, to provide investment for this model, which we've got interest. We're talking to UK Infrastructure Bank, we've talked to Triple Point, we've talked to various different investors who are interested because of the scale and because it's a dumb infrastructure. There's no moving parts, it's just pipe work. So a bit like, you know, the gas grid. You know, well, actually the gas grid is a lot more risky, but it's fairly low risk. So I mean, you don't have that huge amount of development finance up front like you would with a centralized heat network or a mine water, taking heat from mine water. That's a centralized heat network. So this circumvents a lot of the issues around that upfront development finance, because essentially we're showing if there's demand for a cluster, then here's a workable model. We just need the investment to deliver it. Hopefully, but we're not there yet, Guy.
Well, one of the problems, we spoke to a company in Scotland doing a similar thing, Townrock Energy, and at the time I spoke to them, they didn't have a business model. Everything was grants. And they did say to me, if I came up with one, let them know. But, you know, but the risk to anyone in a house, would I have my heating dependent on somebody getting a grant every year? No, you know.
No, and that's what we're trying to get to that
okay,
point.
Thank you.
We have investors, we have Abundance helping us with putting the investment case together, so that they are in right at the beginning alongside the project development. So we will design it round investability. And lastly, Adrian, before we then move into the deeper dive.
I don't whether
it's Cara. I couldn't see your hand. Okay, we'll take Adrian and then Cara. Adrian, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, 2 points really. In terms of planning for retrofit, external wall insulation is normally permitted development unless it's in a conservation area or it's listed. So we've done loads in Durham, and it's all been through permitted development, as long as you replicate the facade. So if you're doing a brick property, you make sure it's brick. If it's stone, it has to be stone. We have gone through the planning process for some of the conservation areas in the areas of outstanding natural beauty and the North Pennines. So that's that one. And then just in terms of the scalable model and getting away from the grant dependency, I was at the Rosendale event earlier on Tuesday, and I spoke to Kenza about whether we could, where we've done good retrofit, for example, in Chiltern with Guy and in Craghead, where we've got the external wall insulation, the PV on the roofs, could we actually go for a ground source heat pump system that you're along the lines that you've just shown? And Kenza reckon if we can get about a critical mass of about 5 people in those terraces to engage and sign up, they would actually be able to put the infrastructure in, and we'd access the boiler upgrade scheme. So you can actually access grant to do some of the stuff now, and it might be possible to do bits of this now where you've actually done quite good retrofit already if you're a bit advanced on the process. So going back to Guy, you know, can we get, you know, there does seem to be an appetite from installers with some investment of their own to actually get this going. So I'm keen to look at that route at the moment.
I absolutely, Adrian. I think if you can crowd in other funding to or funding that's already happened, i.e. the work you've done on retrofit already, and get a system in now, brilliant. I suppose key point is if it's already funded and people can access that with no cost, even better. But I suppose long term, it's whether you have to have that operation and maintenance and putting in that smart local energy system as well at a later date. But absolutely, it can be incremental if you've already done a load of work.
Yeah, I mean, the point is it's actually doable. This isn't going to be a grant. The model you're proposing here is actually looks like it could be a scalable option, especially if we get if we can do it on that 30% critical mass, which Reese was going back to. I mean, you know, it's very exciting this to move us on. And, you know, Guy will be relieved, you know, he won't be having to be, his heating won't be dependent upon grant funding, you know. So really very enthusiastic about this.
That's good. Guy's going to become one of our customer personas along with your wonderful Jim, your Park of Works person. Right, Cara, let's hear from you. I think your hand was up.
Hello, thank you. Very exciting. Good to be here. Nice to see you all. I've put a few questions in the Q&A and some may be a bit jumping the gun.
Oh, sorry, I haven't looked in the Q&A.
That's right. I don't know where best to put it.
Go for it.
But several questions, if you don't mind, and you can defer some to later if there's more to come. But I guess back on that retrofit delivery, where you've got mixed tenure, are you able to look at kind of mixed funded and self-funding in order to deliver, so we're not kind of missing out some of the householders who can't, who aren't eligible for these grant funding solutions?
Well, the idea is that there won't be any need for grant funding solutions. So the whole point is to try and create this kind of homogenous solution. So we don't have one solution for Mr. Jones and a different solution for Mrs. Smith, because that slows the process down. So the idea is it's no upfront cost. My point to Adrian is, if you have got access to grant funding and you can speed up this process, then by all means go for it. But we're doing like a base case foundational model where there's an assumption that no one's got any grant funding and they can't access grant funding. So actually, what's the least cost case? But you know, what we will try and do from that base case is, if we can lever an Eco4, for example, that means we can add funding from a different pot, we'll lower that standing charge for people. So, but this is kind of a foundational case that is non-grant dependent, because as we all know, grants come and go, they're very time consuming to apply for, and it means that we haven't got a homogenous solution for everybody, whether you're homeowner, private rented or social landlord.
Exactly, so that's good to hear that's going to be a solution. And I guess the other point on the back of that is, how do you then retain the householder for the duration? Because obviously they're free to kind of go elsewhere if they wanted to, and what we need is long-term commitment. And how do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I suppose that the point here is that people will sign up to a connection agreement, and the idea is that we are going to lower their bill. So the connection agreement will also include them to opt into an energy club. So that's where they get the benefits of flexibility as being part of this energy club. You know, we're aggregating that demand across the Terrace street. We can turn things on and off if people agree to that. So we're trying to get people the value of future flexibility back to them, rather than kind of sucked out the model. So we're hoping that our offer will be a no-brainer in the here and now, but also in the future. People can opt out if they want to change energy supplier. They could opt out of being in that energy club. It means they wouldn't get the benefit of any kind of optimization and flexibility, etc. If they wanted to disconnect from the heat network, they could. They might want to put a different, you know, electric boiler in, but the idea is that that would be a lot more expensive to run. So actually, they're always going to be best staying in the most efficient system possible, which is ideally what we've got. Technology advances, you know, we kind of think, well, what might be in the future? Someone said, what about cold fusion? You know, which is always 40 years away. But actually, when you look at how we've done space heating in this country for a long time, it's not really moved on very much. So actually, you know, people talk about infrared, you know, that heats the people, not the house. So that's not great for building fabric. So we might, you know, the risk is that we might have something new crop up and people will say, well, actually, this isn't as affordable as I want it to be. But I think that the idea is we've got to keep it a no-brainer offer in the here and now and in the future.
And
Right,
Cara,
and finally,
you know, when you buy a house, you've got the boiler. I mean, you're looking at a lot of different things, aren't you? I've got a 30-year-old Rayburn, which I'm just going to rip out and do something clever with. Still got it.
No,
you know.
quite.
So you'd move in and you'd be on a heat network and you'd just crack on, I suppose. So you would inherit that agreement. So and Cara's got a couple of questions about the aggregation part, the billing part, and the clever shifting bit.
Okay, yeah,
which leads us almost into the next.
Yeah, is that the next
bit?
Yeah.
So thanks for that cue there, Cara. So should we move on into the deep dive, and that should pick up some of those issues. I need to give you a break at some point, but we need to not get so deep that we don't talk about what we can do to help you and how you can help us. So,
yes, so the idea behind the deep dive is just to kind of give you an indication of the moving parts and where we're up to in our thinking around how that looks in delivery. So yeah, so we've just to recap, this is how kind of everything fits together: physical infrastructure, creation of demand, the virtual infrastructure, and the bit in the middle, how it all, you know, the organizational governance and how it all operates. I think I might be moving on to, oh no. So yeah, in terms of the physical infrastructure, I think I've kind of run through this already. It's nothing new. It's shared ground loops that have been delivered and deployed in social housing for over a decade. Retrofit, Kayla's on the line, that she's been doing it for well over a decade. Solar, there's been social housing projects with solar and storage, doing clever stuff like together housing. Smart water cylinders, Mixergy have got thousands of these rolled out, and repairs as well. I think that's really essential, is how we optimize the fabric of the building as well. So it's got to be the whole building envelope. So what is new is transposing this onto mixed tenure streets, offering no upfront cost, and the debt levered onto the borehole infrastructure and repaid by a standing charge. The creation and delivery of a smart system that will be for the benefit of the people rather than not, and this kind of community-based approach, where we will look to return the benefit to the community, which isn't a new model, because lots of us have been in community energy for a very long time, but it's applying it to a different system. And creating an ability to have that planned, phased, coordinated approach. We can really help mobilise the supply chain, which has been historically a big problem with retrofit because of that ad hoc nature, and also those jobs and skills as well, because we can say to the supply chain and the workforce, this is what it looks like, and at the moment we can't do that. So I've talked a bit about engagement and that creation of demand, and really this is the fundamental point, is we're not going to get anywhere without bringing people along. So it has to be about what they want: affordable, low carbon energy, healthy, warm homes at no upfront cost to the householder. Without those fundamental points, we're not going to get that 30% critical mass that we need. So it's got to be this no-brainer offer, but it's also got to have this underpinning ethos of a trusted model. So it's transparent with social benefits, trusted messengers, so our energy champions who are based locally, and trusted delivery partners that are going to give us quality assurance. And what we've been doing is we've been working with John and Andy at the Fairer Warmth app, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But really what we're trying to deliver in our kind of community approach, and this is trying to apply this to a cold start community, so a community that's not got enthusiastic people like us to seed something, and also kind of a fast follower approach where actually you've got a pump primed community who are raring to go. So it's how we actually do that initial contact with that reach of people. How do we get to the people in the first place? How do we then engage people? What's our methodology around engaging? And lots of that's been done in retrofit already, but then it's the retain bit. So essentially what we're doing is a little bit different, is we're giving people that pathway to decarbonise. So often with retrofit, you can do the reach and the engage, and then you say to people, okay, here's your retrofit plan. Now you need to get 3 quotes, and you've lost people. As soon as you say to someone you've got to get 3 quotes, they're not going to do it because they're really busy and they've got kids and etc. Or elderly parents or whatever it might be. But it's adding massive barriers for people to delivery, whereas the retain approach here is about people being collectively part of a pathway together. So they don't have to, they can be as active or as passive as they want to be in that process. And using the Fairer Warmth app to digitalise that process as well for those who want to be included digitally. And obviously you've got to have your energy champions there for those who don't want to be included digitally as well. So we've kind of looked at 8 different campaigns, and on the Fairer Warmth app, we are using different QR codes for different campaigns. So historically, when we've done retrofit or any kind of energy efficiency engagement previously, we really don't have much of an idea of what the impact is unless we go back and do another survey, and you get a lot of issue with survey fatigue and engagement fatigue as well. So the Fairer Warmth app is really trying to circumvent the issue that people have with survey fatigue and engagement fatigue. There's an assumption that in-person advice has to be given if people are going to move along this decarbonisation pathway. Lots of people don't want in-person advice. They'd rather interact with with an app, or they'd rather watch a YouTube video. So we can't make an assumption that in-person advice is the best way to deliver decarbonisation. But actually what we can do with the app, or if people don't want to download the app, they work with the Energy Champion who logs them in, is we can see how people are interacting. So have they downloaded a video on boiler optimization? Have they watched that video? Can we send them a push notification to say, did you manage to action anything, or would you like an Energy Champion to help you? So this is really, really key for us, is to actually be able to monitor, evaluate, and then learn from the impact we're having through these different methodologies. And we've picked 8. You might be doing something different in your community. And this is part of the kind of sharing and learning we want to do is, well, actually, what have you missed? What works really well in your community? We're also working with CAD Consultant on the SIF Alpha, and they are helping deliver a monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. So again, that's something that we want to share with other communities so they can then see how impactful their work is. And it'll be really interesting to see how different communities have different impacts around those different campaigns as well. So the Fairer Warmth app, I've mentioned that it's a key kind of backbone for what we're doing, and I've said it can do 4 things. It's actually, I've put an extra one, so it's 5 things. It's there to we've obviously got to reach people, but then the app's there to engage people. We want people to download the app, and then we want to engage them, but it's also going to do other things as well. It's also going to map new areas of interest. So we could go to a new community and do a couple of those campaigns. It might just be door knocking or leaflet dropping or posters up in a health centre, for example. And we can see what interest we get, and then where we get clusters of interest, for example. And then we want that app to collect energy data for us and information about the house as well. So whether that's, have you got double glazed window, how old are your double glazed windows, etc. So all sorts of information. And it goes back to this survey fatigue. If we can do it in a light touch, incremental way, that means that people don't get bored and time out, and we can see when people have got disengaged with the app as well, and we can then evaluate, well, why have they got disengaged? What can we do different to make sure that they retain that interest along the way? So it's about keeping people interested and informed, and then eventually, you know, this is all about being part of an energy club. So we want people, a bit like Collective Switch, we want people to understand that if they persuade their neighbour to sign up and be interested too, then actually they're all going to benefit, and they'll all benefit more the more people that get involved. So it's really about that kind of peer-to-peer, neighbour-to-neighbour encouragement to try and join this local energy club, which is transparent, it's there for community benefit. And then it's about mapping that householder journey. So talking about that first knock to the operation, we want people to be able to see where they're up to on that journey through the app as well. Okay, so John, do you want to just talk a little bit about Fairer Warmth? I've not landed you in it there.
Yeah, sure. I think you covered a lot of it, but I'll see if I can add anything. But yeah, hi everyone, I'm John McHugh from the Centre for Energy Equality. We're a social enterprise that are trying to help with the just and fairer transition to low carbon energy. And yeah, we're the people behind developing the Fairer Warmth app with RV.
Let's move you on. Sorry, John. There we go.
So I guess, how many slides are there, Kate? Sorry, is it
only about 5? Sorry.
Okay, I don't want to. I'll go through this quickly, but yes, with RVE, we've developed this application that can be used in a number of different ways to improve engagement, to get information about people's properties, and to build a picture with data around where areas would likely take up a scheme like Net Zero Terrace, and then following on from that, use that to try and help people through the journey to take it from, as Kate was saying, initial knock on the door to a scheme that's installed. You can see your energy bills, you can interact with the system. So we're hoping that it's going to be a sort of front-facing tool to keep people engaged and used throughout the lifetime of this type of project. There are different ways to use the system. So we've got individuals. So these are your homeowners, where you can use this as a tool to kind of get lots of the public data on your property. You can, if once you've signed up, you answer a couple of questions and it brings up some information. it kind of recommends lots of different ways to improve your home or your energy bill. And these are things like information on retrofit measures. So we've got detailed articles on different retrofit measures. We've got detailed articles on simple things like changing your light bulbs and the usual stuff, draft proofing and that type of stuff. And the other thing that it does for individuals is signpost them to schemes like Net Zero Terrace. So if it turns out that you're on a terrace street in an area where this is happening, the Bake Up, for instance, it will say, great news, you're in Bake Up. Here's some information on the scheme, and it'll try and take you through that journey. If you're not that savvy with apps and the internet and all that type of stuff, and you'd rather throw that all in the bin, we have a champion system, which allows energy champions, so people in the community that can still be able to collect the really useful data that we need, but take people through step by step in the collecting the same information, but on the person's behalf. So this could be in person, it could be at community events, and Kate and the team have been doing a great job onboarding people in this way, and it allows us to not only collect that information on the property and the homeowner, but also we can get some other information like how engaged that person was, or what was the reason they signed up in the first place. So it starts a conversation. You can take them through some of the options and improve engagement that way. And as part of that, we have an additional section of Fairer Warmth. It's not currently in the app, but it's something we're developing, and this will help train these champions to go out and talk with some confidence about retrofit, about different types of buildings. It's kind of an interactive way to train up people in the community to be able to improve engagement and contact with homeowners, to try and engage as many people as possible. Yes, and as I mentioned, the system recommends things to do next. So it'll recommend grants, and it'll also recommend local schemes such as Net Zero Terrace. So you'll be able to click on that and learn more. I'm assuming the next slide is, yes. So once you do, as part of Fairer Warmth, if you do kind of engage or click on Net Zero Terrace Street, it'll track all that information to try and figure out who's engaging with these systems. It'll allow you to ask questions, and then it'll try and give you as much information as possible. And the overall goal is to allow people to go, oh, that sounds interesting, I want to get involved, and do that in a simple, I don't have to ask you 1,000 questions sort of way. So all the information will be at your fingertips, so to speak, and then it will take you through a really informative journey of like all the steps that need to happen to make this start you on your Net Zero Terrace journey. This is not a finalized list, but the idea is you'll be given lots of information on what's happening next. It'll also have information on other people in your community, or the numbers of people in your community that are also on the journey. It'll tell you to provide extra data that will be really important, such as photos of where we can locate heating systems, so like cupboards. It may ask you to take a picture of your loft insulation, for instance, so then we can build a better picture of your home without needing to keep knocking on your door and asking questions. And that just builds a picture, an aggregated picture of all that information. The other thing that we're going to ask for upfront is a bit more information on your energy bills. So this is going back to the incremental data that we'll try and extract. So it's you don't have to give everything up front, but we'll take you on the journey and we'll tell you why these bits of information are really useful, and then we'll collect that, and then that'll lead us on to the next stage. And so yeah, energy information is really important for building the cost model, and also showing you how much you may save using the system.
Brilliant. I think that's it, John. Thank you for that, John.
Thank you. Yeah, there's lots more. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to email me.
Great, thanks, John. And yeah, just to dwell on that kind of consumer or the customer service blueprint and work that Louise has been doing on kind of mapping that journey and then trying to put that in that process that John just said, so people know where they're up to in that process and keeping people informed. So yeah, that idea that you know that 10% of your street is interested in becoming a net zero terrace street, for example. So you know that actually if you want to get this over the line, then you need to start knocking on some doors or speaking to some people in your local community. And I think the point here on this slide is about the fact that actually we've got to have this deep understanding within the community and what the barriers are. So it's really kind of the nitty-gritty issues that often top-down frameworks totally miss. So actually, you know, number 7, they might have asbestos, or they've got a really old meter that needs to be resolved first, or a problem that Electricity Northwest have highlighted that potentially, you know, properties might be linked together, or they might actually have a cable that connects them running through the basement. So there's lots of issues that we will have to pick up and resolve prior to deployment. So this is about how we really pick up those nitty-gritty issues, broken gutters, broken roof tiles, etc., that have to be resolved before you can deploy. And that really relies on the Fairer Warmth app collecting that information from people taking photos, and the energy champions having a really good knowledge of their area and their community as well. So just going back to the four things moving around. So we've talked a lot about the demand creation and the ability of things like the Fairer Warmth to get us that energy data, which is critical. And I think it's over to Phil. Phil, I'm landing you in it as well. Are you okay to run through your slides, Phil?
Kate, can I just bring in Harry's question, because it's about engagement before Phil takes us into the inner workings of this. Harry, do you want to speak? Or are you happy for me to read your question? If you don't want to speak, I'm not going to hear you say so.
I'm happy to speak. It's just my team's been playing up, so I wasn't sure if things were right.
Oh, if it plays up, I'll take over from you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's just around sort of the different roles of who would be expected to do what in the engagement piece, you know, how much of it and where the barriers are between things being led by local communities, local councils, and the point at which one would expect to almost hand things over to a potential investor or supplier, and sort of where they best work together and where they're best separated in that process.
I tried to explain it in the chat a bit and then got tied rather in a knot when I hit the bit about the energy supplier, because you'd asked about whether the technical feasibility engagement being best done by the community or council and when the supplier investor gets involved. And we'll come on to a sort of governance structure later on. So there'll be a local deployment sort of vehicle or company that's set up. But the engagement piece, I think it's fair to say, will be done very much by a local community organisation or council if they wanted to do it. And we've got 4 energy advisors working at the moment, and we'll have many more energy champions out doing that face-to-face work using the Fairer Warmth app and face-to-face engagement. And yesterday I was asking Phil about this, whether the planning section that he'll come on to now is available. So if I live in a street, I could look it up and go, oh, could my street be a net zero terrace street? And then I could initiate that. I wouldn't expect the investor to ever, I mean, they might want to come and chat to some people. They're far away in London up their ivory tower with pots of cash. They're just going to give us the cash. Well, I mean, obviously, with all the due diligence.
This is being recorded, Louise. So.
Oh yes, dear investors.
Yeah. But yeah, I think just to add to that as well, I think the point is, Harry, that the ownership of the asset should be within community benefit, and so that special purpose vehicle, which might be different because it might be a local authority joint venture, for example, in one community, it might be a community entity in another community. So that's very much up to whoever is wanting to take this forward. But I think the point is that the investors will be added into the projects. You know, they're not the service provider. The service provider is the community entity that will take this forward, and they will call on investors and they will call on the energy supplier to bring that service to them. But they will have overall overarching that kind of that governance will sit with them over the long term, because the point is that we want this to be beneficial to the community now, in 10 years, in 40 years, if it's still the most efficient way to heat homes.
That's really useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harry. Phil, shall I hop over to you? Is that okay?
Yep, sure. Yeah. You can hear me okay? So this slide here is a simplified diagram showing the commercial model that we're running to. So this hopefully in part at least helps answer some of the earlier questions as well on how we're funding this in from the perspective of the consumer. So we've got two basic elements to this: the standing charge and then the energy tariff, similar to the structure of the utility bill today. In the standing charge, we apportion most of the capital costs associated with the scheme. So this is the heat infrastructure itself, the boreholes, the loops, the heat pumps, the fabric retrofit, including the wet system and any updates we need to make. That particular retrofit package is tuned in such a way to make the heat system work effectively, and not go over and above that, because we don't think we need to. So to explain that in slightly more detail, because of the space constraints in these properties, we're looking at a 6 kilowatt internal heat pump to keep the size down, and we therefore need to put an efficiency package in that allows that 6 kilowatt pump to work effectively, and that package is then absorbed into the capital costs of the scheme. There are some other elements as well around in-home control and management, which links to the smart control and management of the system, which is there to reduce the bill and optimize the system. So that's also portioned in the capex. So that's all wrapped up, and that's assigned to a standing charge. And there are some variables in there, but depending on the capital item, the payback we're trying to get as long as possible over the period. So, you know, where we can, sort of 25, 30 years, because that then reduces the monthly payments, and that goes onto the bill. And then the energy price tariff, so this is your kilowatt hour rate that goes onto the bill as well. That's linked and pinned to the energy supplier arrangement that we have, which includes a local energy model. So within that, we've got three basic elements. We've got rooftop solar, which would be community owned or at least community managed. So the ownership model contractually we're picking through as to where it's actually owned by the homeowner, but from a management perspective, it's not assigned to the home. It's pooled as a solar array across the rooftops, and it's managed as a local energy system, as a community system. So that contributes to the energy supply to the homes. We have off-site renewables. So Kate mentioned the solar co-op. So any community renewables that we can also assign to that. And then we have the access to an energy supply pool as well, which is almost like, if in simple terms, the top up. So anything that the community renewable can't deliver sufficient, if it can't deliver sufficiently, the annual energy usage for the homes will be accessing an energy pool. Now, that might be a wholesale market pool in some cases, depending on the energy supply you use. But in this case, we're working with Urban Chain, who have PPA arrangements with individual generators and form a pool outside of the wholesale market. So we work with them, and then they, as an energy supplier, basically do all of the administration and management of that piece. And then we determine the PPA rates and therefore the energy tariff that gets assigned to the home. And because it's an electric heating system effectively, and i.e. you're running heat pumps, then depending on the energy usage of those heat pumps, obviously depends on how much energy use by home will be assigned to that tariff. And that determines how we pay back some of the renewable schemes as well. So the cost of the renewable scheme we're looking at very carefully in terms of how that then translates to the energy tariff. But because we're trying to embed as much not-for-profit elements into this, so there will be some profit-based aspects, but if we're using not-for-profit as well, we should keep the overall cost down. So all of that wraps up, and that effectively becomes the cost to consumer, because there's only one way to really generate revenue in this scheme, and that's on the bill. So we're very sensitive to that, and we don't want to increase rates. So we assign it to the bill, and then we look very carefully at affordability to the consumer. We've got some sensitivities on the right that we're picking through. So we're building an economic model for this at the moment, so we can look at those sensitivities. And clearly there will be around the rate of finance that we use to pay for items, the CapEx, OpEx costs themselves, the RepEx costs. So these are the replacement costs. So some things will have a different lifetime cycle to others. Solar PV, 30 years, inverter, maybe 10, 15 years. So we factor all of that in. The payback periods, inflation, predictions on energy pricing, we take that into account as well. So we wrap all of that up and look at the variables. And the other thing we're looking at is scale as well, and economies of scale. So, you know, whilst the case study itself today focuses on, say, 200 homes in Bacup, we want to roll this out at scale, and there will be economies of scale that come with that. So we're looking at those as well to understand what the trajectory looks like for bringing that cost down, and possibly how much funding in the first instance we might have to bring in from, say, grant funding or other finance sources to make it viable in the first instance. So that's it, I think, in a nutshell. Have I missed anything at all? So this model, this diagram explains the three elements that we at Borough Happold are looking at to bring everything together. So the planning, energy model and techno-economic model. So I've really just described how we're using the techno-economic model to understand the overall cost and how the bill would look. The energy model, this is around understanding the performance of the system itself, so that can educate us, if you like, on how we factor in certain elements around system performance and flexibility. The system performance really being around how the system will perform from a building perspective, i.e. the heat performance of the building, how much, what size of the retrofit needs to be, the size of the infrastructure itself, etc. But also then taking into account different user profiles. So we know that the occupants will determine how much energy is actually used in a home. And we also need to make sure that at a community level, the system needs to take into account that very, very different occupancy profiles may exist, and they may change as well within the neighbourhood over time. So therefore we need to understand that and understand how then we model the area, and then how that feeds into other aspects. So for example, it feeds into the techno-economic model in terms of understanding the rate and consumption of energy, and therefore what the bill might look like for different households. It also feeds into how we plan the system as well, so we understand the performance of the system and how it might impact the local electrical utility as well, so what that demand might look like on the system. And then that informs us on flexibility. So in terms of what we mean by flexibility, there are a number of definitions of flexibility out there, but we're looking at two things mainly. One is how to flexibly operate the system to try and reduce the bill for people, so we can fairly distribute the energy and manage the system so it uses the community energy as much as possible, for example. And we're looking at flexibility in terms of how to get more homes onto the network. So if there is a network constraint in the area that we're looking at, we can get more homes connected to that network if we can use some flexibility in the system. And we believe we can do that because we've got flexibility in the way we can control the heat pump. We've got flexibility in terms of thermal storage in people's hot water tanks, etc. But we also can add flexibility, for example, using batteries. That flexibility is constrained by home comfort, which goes back to the user profiles. Moving on to the planning, what we mean by planning in this case is how to understand where to deploy and how to deploy these ambient loop clusters in an area. So this links to the point Louise was raising earlier. So we're building a planning approach that we can make available then to others that contains these three elements. One of them is the electrical element from the infrastructure point of view, working with the local DNO. So this links to my point around where's their capacity to deploy, where might we need flexibility, and that information is really critical from an infrastructure planning point of view, but also to feed back to the community engagement process. You don't want to prime and engage with communities if there's going to be a delay to deployment because you need to reinforce the network, for example. So you want that information made available to you. The cluster deployment is around, well, what is it we're trying to actually deploy in the ground? What's the size of the cluster? How much PV do we actually need to deploy? How much have we got available? Have we got south facing roofs, east west? How do we orientate the system? How how many homes do we think we're going to connect, where we're going to deploy the boreholes in the streets, so the physical infrastructure. So we need to understand that at a granular level. And then the community planning piece, this is around priming communities, engagement, understanding the demographics in the home, and feeding that into the planning approach and the engagement approach. So we understand, for example, where we think we would like to prime a community, where communities might already be primed, understanding a little bit more around the occupants and the engagement process. And we transfer that information across the 3 columns so we can understand where we would like to prime, where we can prime, where the infrastructure will permit us to deploy, and when, so we can phase that deployment as well. So that all comes together into the planning process.
Oh, this one's one of mine, Phil, and it's,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but it was just to show you that we're trying to link up the grid asset deployment, so DNO asset deployment, with the community asset deployment, so it becomes one process. So there are points in the engagement process which kind of moves along to the right from, you know, cold start community or fast follower, where you inform the DNO, right, we're looking at this particular area, and then we kind of update them at certain points. So we really kind of intertwine the 2 processes, rather than the DNO just think they're doing something different on their own. It becomes much more harmonious with what needs to happen at deployment on the ground. I think it's back to you now, Phil.
This is just a snapshot of some of the things we've been looking at. So we've got a flow that we've been developing that builds on what Kate's just displayed, that technically and from a data point of view links everything together as well. And there's a couple of little snapshots of examples of how we approach it in Borough Happel. So the bottom right is actually a project in Bristol, but where we graded properties based on where there's network capacity in the network, the type of energy efficiency rating those buildings have, and the level of retrofit we need to deploy in those buildings. And then the map with the yellow dots is actually Rosendale, and we've been mapping actually that there's 14,000 homes that would benefit from the scheme in Rosendale, where they're located, and then we can start to understand the deployment from a cluster perspective, but also then how to inform and phase the local community engagement process as part of that as well. I think I've covered quite a lot on the techno-economic modelling already, so I won't labour that, other than to say it's not a financial investment tool. It's about the techno-economic viability, but it will inform the investment stakeholders that we have that are looking at what the finance models are, because there's so much sensitivity around that. But also then what the viability of the model is, so that they can have confidence that it will work, and scalability of it. So this is the flow in our techno-economic model, so it should be very much aligned to the diagram I showed. You can see the costs on the left split between the solar generation and the capacity, and then the payback, and then we've got the finance rates in there feeding into the standing charge, and then we do a cash flow analysis on that as well to look at the cost consumer. And the energy model itself, I've described as well, but that's basically focused on flexibility provision and catering for different user profiles under different scenarios. So we're actually building an energy model to first explore the scheme options and how that links to the techno-economic model. So, for example, if you need flexibility in the system because the location that you're deploying requires some flexibility, you feel you need to therefore put some extra assets in there, then obviously the techno-economic model will take into account that cost, but also the benefit of doing that and the benefit of deployment. So that's something we're working through with ENWL at the moment, whilst it also look at those different profiles and the sensitivity to profiles and ensuring that the comfort's retained in the system. That is also feeding into the technical design process, so that actual control system and the actual smart system, which I think we'll come on to now. And that's described in terms of a system architecture. So we're actually building the smart energy system architecture at the moment. So what that basically is identifying the physical components that go into the smart energy system that optimizes this, but also the actors, i.e. the organizations and the operating requirements for that system, the information exchanges between those systems, and then ultimately that comes down to a functional set of requirements that we work with the market on. We're already working with the market and Salford University testing some items at the moment around the home energy management solution as part of the project, which gives us a very high level of confidence that whilst there's some development needed, actually there's a lot of off-the-shelf capability already in existence in the market that we can leverage, which will reduce the cost of deployment and the time taken to deploy as well. So we thought that was going to be the case, but we've now actually properly been evaluating it.
Oh, that one's just your diagram that I've put into colours, Phil. But I don't think
That's fine.
we need to labour on that one. It's just to show people that how things interface. So we obviously got the Fairer Warmth app that needs to integrate with the home energy management system, which needs to integrate with the community energy management system. And then over on the right, this is where it all happens with the integration with the network. And this is all part of this will be developed under. It's currently being developed under the Strategic Innovation Fund Alpha, and will be part of our beta application as well. Oh, which kind of brings us on to right. So sorry, thanks, Phil. I'll just take a break there in terms of any questions. I can see you've got your hand up, Louise.
Yeah, I've got a hand up because I've got a couple of questions that were in the chat, which I've done my best to answer. But bear in mind, when I answer a technical question, it's my understanding of it. So then I have to check it with Phil to check it's correct. And I've got, so the first one of those was Dave, who'd asked about how we're going to get at the landlords. So this is going back to engagement. So I've responded to that in the chat, which is we'll have a different journey for renters and landlords, and we will be engaging with landlords. But if I'm a renter and I'm speaking to an energy advisor, they might talk about the scheme and I might speak to my landlord. And if I'm terrified of my landlord, I might get an energy advisor to contact the landlord. And then there's a bit of stuff in the chat about this is a real no-brainer for landlords, actually, because it helps improve their house with the no cost to them, and it helps their renters have an affordable heating system and then less likely to have black mold, damp and an underheated grotty house. So we've sort of done that one. Cara just asked, is it a 6 kilowatt heat pump in the house? Yes. Does that give, is that supplying space and water heating demand? Yes, it is. Guy's hand is up for a question, and then Reese's hand is up as well. So take Guy and then Reese, please.
Hello, I'm just trying to wait for my camera to come on. They're not peddling enough at the internet provider at the moment.
Wind that hand
There we
on.
are, yeah. Hiya. Just a question. Kate might be able to answer this best, actually. I love the business case around it. I love it. But we're an organisation of part-time volunteers, and I'm a bit concerned that we're taking on something that could be a full-time business, really, on the basis of we meet in a local working men's club. We tend to meet on an evening rather than business hours. Some are retired. I run my own business and things, and I sometimes think we may be underarmed to take this on. And I wondered how you got over that.
Yeah, I mean we're a voluntary organisation as well, Guy. But I think the key is gaining funding to then bring resource in. So I mean I just have my screen shared. I'll go through some funding in a minute. But yeah, in terms of this kind of model replicating and deploying, we're hoping that we can gather funding for this kind of cold start community or fast follower community approach, because actually the supply chain will want to mobilise and we'll see this route to mobilisation. So we're kind of costing out. I mean that kind of diagram I showed you earlier, which was like a time series, that basically has the stages in there. So that first touch and then growing interest, and they will have a cost to those. But we think that because if we can show impact and deliverability towards deployment, then we should get funding for communities like yourselves. So that there might be like, here's 75,000, go see if you can get 30% interest in this area of 2,000 homes. So we're hoping that resource will come because we're proving that we can gain the traction that we need in consumer demand to deploy the solution.
So we'd move from really, hopefully funding would take us from being well-meaning amateurs to bring in some professionals to take it into a more business-driven thing.
Yeah, and paying for your own resource, or people that you
Yeah.
have interviewed locally that you think can bring that resource. So
Yeah.
yeah. So we're trying to create a product that has a demand, and then we want the supply chain to come in and fund that because we're creating a new demand.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Guy.
And
I'm
if you're
still
based in a
scared.
working, we're all scared, Guy. If it's like being on a roller coaster. I'm really excited as well as I'm not scared. The other thing is, in the Working Men's Club, you've got that instant rapport with people. You've got roots into the community. You're connected. You are the community, and we want to create paid jobs for people in communities, and bring in younger people as well, and get that supply chain going and get those skills going, so people
We've got
train
very
up to
cheap
do
beer
this.
as well, which does help.
Even better. Right, we're booking a field trip up to visit you.
Yeah.
So right, on a
People from the
serious note,
south appreciate £3 a pint.
excellent. I'm from Yorkshire, so yeah, ours
Oh,
is
well,
cheap.
you'll be
Yours
all
might
right.
be cheaper. Right, listen, but also this is being recorded, so I've got to be sensible. So, and I've got lots of hands up, and I haven't given you a break. So yeah, okay. I seem to be getting worse at facilitation the more I do it. I've got Reese, then I've got a question about cooling from Chris, and then I've got James's hand up. So Reese, your turn.
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Can you go back to that slide on the high-level commercials that Phil was showing?
Yeah.
It was one of the earlier slides, I think.
That one?
That's the one. So the first column I get. The second column, if we didn't do that, could you remove that column altogether and then just concentrate on, okay, well, let's see if we can get investment for the first column in order to create a positive business case? Or do you have to have both columns in order for this to be cost effective? And the reason why I ask this is because it's a lot easier just to concentrate on that first column to get funding for it. As soon as you add the second column, there's a whole new level of complexity, which will then wipe out a load of potential customers.
I don't think, I mean, I agree, it adds a whole load of complexity, but the point is the spark gap that we've got to overcome. Gas prices are way cheaper than electricity prices. So if we're electrifying heat, we have to subsidise the cost of power for people. So that's the kind of urban chain that we're working with, the local energy market. So that generation, that local generation that we're bringing into this kind of local energy club is absolutely key to getting affordability for the householder, which is absolutely necessary if we're going to get them to say, yes, I want to be included in this scheme. So I agree with you. It would be very much easier if we didn't have to do that. But with current tariffs as they are, we do.
I would just say, yeah, there's an argument around there which we could debate about, but yeah, gas prices are probably only higher because electricity prices aren't being properly regulated.
Yeah. I mean, I've listened on lots of REMA stakeholder. I mean, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. We hope it will, and then we can take that complexity out. But at the same time, it's it's all about that local balancing anyway. So that's a really useful thing, is to have local generation that you could balance locally, and then you've got that additional flexibility on the local and the national grid as well.
Yes. So it gives you get to those extra revenue, I guess. But if you're doing this fabric retrofit and you're getting people up to EPC 8A, or whatever it is, and you've got a ground source heat pump in, my understanding was that should be cheaper than a gas boiler, even with today's prices. So going back to that kind of point, I get there's a benefit for both, but in terms of scaling and from an investor point of view, let's say a pension company wanted to get involved in this and wanted to know scale, could they say, yeah, look, we're willing to fund that first one, but that second one, potentially, that might not be fundable by them?
Yeah, they're not. We're not asking them to fund the second one. We'd only be asking them to fund the first one.
I see.
But the second one is something that we as a community energy organisation will try and deploy to get to that affordability
Okay.
point. So we're only wanting them to fund the physical infrastructure. So yeah, that's the part that they don't need to be, but they need to see the affordability for the consumer, so they know that they're going to get their standing charge back, basically, because if their energy bills are high, then you're going to get more chance of defaulting on the standing charge. So it's part of that overall model that they need to see that it's affordable for consumers.
Okay,
Brilliant.
makes sense. Thank you.
Excellent. And then that's just been mentioned in the chat too. So I've got 2 questions which I want to address for Phil. I'll do them both, Phil. They're in the chat. Can the system do cooling? And second question, is the 6 kilowatt heat pump with the tank and all that going to be enough for long baths, for family baths and long showers and so on and so forth? So if you can do those two, will it cool? Will everyone have enough hot water, or will you be like our house? Share the bath water.
Yeah, so that it can do cooling. We've not focused on cooling, but there's no reason with the system why you can't actually extract heat through the wet system and put it into the ground actually as well. So that's completely possible. For these particular homes, we've not seen cooling so much of an issue as heating, so we've focused on the heating cycle, but it's something that's definitely there and technically you're able to do. And then on the supply of water, I've sort of put in the chat, but we are putting storage in with it as well. So there will be a hot water tank, or if there is a space constraint to put the hot water tank in, we'll be looking to put a thermal battery in that provides a good supply of hot water as well. So that, in the context of is there enough water, is no different to a gas systems boiler today, in terms of having sufficient storage in the system to supply bath water and water for your family. So
and
it
then
won't be
you'd
pinned to
wait
the
for the
rating of
hot
the heat pump.
water. Yeah, but the hot water
Yeah.
tank would need to fill up again and recharge effectively.
Yeah, just
So-
like, I mean, my system here on a gas
Yeah.
boiler that I've currently got is exactly the same. But what we are doing is we're using a smart thermal storage system, so smart tank, and the home energy management system. Part of the remit of the smart system is to understand that comfort requirement, because there will be certain homes that may need less water than others, and what we want is a system that actually understands that, because that can really help with the flexibility and the performance of the system, in terms of getting more people connected. There is an override as well that is built into the system for that as well. So whilst the system will try and understand how much hot water you're using and how much you actually need, there is the ability to interact and override that, because we understand that at certain times people will want more water, you know, Christmas, etc., and may ask for that, and then we'll be looking at scheduling that as well to try and optimize that. So that's why when I mentioned comfort constraint, that's built into the system to understand that people have sufficient hot water and that their homes are sufficiently warm. But there is a piece around understanding, in conjunction with the community, whether we can have certain sensitivity around that, because that delivers benefits to the wider community.
Thanks, that's great, Phil. I think the cooling thing's quite important, because urban heat effect in city centres where you've got hardly any green infrastructure and you've got lots of houses crammed together is something we're looking at in Greater Manchester next week. So if there's something extra that needs to be done on the install stage, and in the testing you're doing at Salford, I know it, I mean, I don't know how it fits with the funding we've got. It'd be great to do that so we don't have to go back and retrofit, because we are going to see more heat waves, and it's called the hidden killer. So yeah, if we can flag that. And that just brings me to the fact that in flood risk areas, instead of an air source heat pump sat in the garden, which then floods and fills with basically sewage, the little inside heat pump can be up high, out of the level of the water. So when your house floods, it can dry out again afterwards. Similarly, so we're building in this very sort of local approach to looking at the area and what that area will need. So I live in Headton Bridge. We're very prone to flooding. So we would be looking at, when we spec out the retrofit, is that if we're putting a new door in, do we go for a floodproof door? So we're thinking about that already, so I think we're thinking of cooling. 2 more questions. One is about all the stuff that sits below the street in areas where you've got sewers, pipes, road closures, all of that. Dave asked that. Yes, there are online things where you look up which pipes are where. Then you do CAT scans and some other scans of the road to see what's really there. And if you're in London, presumably you don't dig into the London Underground. So that is all dealt with by the folks who know how to dig up roads. So is that enough, Phil, or have I skimmed too quickly over that question? Would I get sacked as an engineer? No. Okay, good. So that's that. I'm squizzling on because I want to get to the point where we talk to you about what we can do for you and what you can do for us. Cara asks, is community benefit fund included? Probably not a fund, but community benefit, I'll sort of refer to Kate in a second on this, it is all about community benefit. Do you want to go on that one, Kate?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say with the solar co-op, it would be a normal community energy model, which would mean that you have a community benefit fund, but that fund would probably be used as a slush fund for people who perhaps can't afford their standing charge for a year or whatever. But yeah, the idea is that any profit would go into a community benefit fund, just like you would with a community benefit society doing solar. So the people of that community would decide how that fund is spent.
But the sort of model for the standing charge model investment payback is if in the sort of whole governance model, if in the future flexibility services are sold, is that then flows back to you, the customer, to keep your standing charge down. It's not, no one's playing with your hot water cylinder and making an absolute fortune that you never see. So it's not an extractive model. So we're working on the governance around sort of not necessarily not-for-profit governance, but we are looking at all of that kind of ethical governance part. James's hand was up. I'm really scared I'm going to miss somebody whose hand was up. James Dyson, do you want to come in from 3CI?
E3G, but no,
Oh,
it's just
yeah, sorry.
No,
sorry about that.
No, it's all right, Louise. Well, thanks very much for the presentation. It's been really good so far. Been really interested in watching this develop. I guess first one little comment on Reese's point earlier about the spark gap. E3G was suggesting they introduced a short-term solution while longer-term reforms to the electricity market are undertaken in the form of a clean heat discount. So all forms of electric heating should be exempt from the cost of the energy company obligation, feed-in tariff, renewables obligation to have a sort of around almost 15% reduction on electricity price, which makes the cost of running an air source heat pump the same as a gas boiler. So that's just a little note. And if anybody's interested in getting in touch with me on that, please do. But then some questions for the panel. I guess at the start, you're assuming around 30% of the street are going to turn onto the heat loop. How do you actually size the heat loop correctly if you're not sure about who might connect later on? And then how do you time with effectively with the people who want to dig up the roads, like the water company or the road manager, so that you weren't waiting like 5 years to, if the road had been freshly tarmacked, how do we make sure that that's not a barrier to rolling out this in streets that are perhaps ready for it, or in a local authority which is ready to go with it? And then lastly, which I think you might be able to answer better later on, what the main barriers are to scaling this project up, this approach, so heat decarbonisation up, and how the next government could support in doing that.
Oh, there were lots of questions there, James. I can do the digging up the road one. So for that, some of the roads won't have been dug up for ages, actually, in the little roads that we're looking at. But what we've seen is you can do, when highways are scheduling works, you can do shared street works. So if you've got Phil's magic map that shows which areas are possible for Net Zero Terrace Street, and we've got area clusters of interest, we would flag that with the council so that if somebody is digging the road up anyway, we might then be able to bring forward that investment and go, right, we're boreholing here while the road's dug up. So you come in after the guys, and then you have done the water, you whack in your boreholes, you resurface the road, you connect after. So you can do clever stuff like that. It's been done in Helen Gratian knows where, or maybe it wasn't done there and should have been Barnard Castle or somewhere. And it's been done in Plymouth successfully, or Portsmouth, but somewhere in the south, beginning with a P. So we would aim to do that in partnership with the local authorities to stop that annoying constant digging up of roads and being delayed. Kate, can you remember any of James's other questions?
Yeah, I think they're both for Phil, to be fair. Phil, can you pick up the first two questions?
You'll have to remind me again. Sorry, I didn't take any notes. Sorry about that, James.
Right. Just first, how do you size the heat loop at the start if you don't know how many people are going to connect, or if you're unsure about how many people are going to connect?
Yeah, I think there's a balance there. Technically, I'm not the best person to answer that because I've got heat engineers in my team, but we're working with Kansas. So broadly speaking, you can extend the loop over and above the homes that are actually going to connect by a certain percentage, and we're looking at typically a viable percentage of homes in the street at 30% to get the route sufficiently working properly. So there's some trade-offs between extending the loop beyond the homes that are connected by a certain margin and putting the boreholes in and the cost associated with that, but not extending it too much so that the efficiency drops down as well. So and the costs that get passed on to the homes that are connecting. So I haven't got exact numbers, but we can get them to you because we've got the model. But there are some trade-offs there. So we wouldn't just put in the loop for the homes that actually want to collect. We would build a larger loop, but there is a limit on how far we go with that before the economics start to get affected by it. So that's in the techno-economic model.
And I think, Phil, I take that as a policy note, which is if you're doing it anyway, you want to get all the loops in. And if you were in Germany, the government would gap fund it. So let's ask UKIB to, we'll look at how we would do that.
I'm just conscious of time. Sorry,
Yes.
James, what was your last question? And I'll whiz through the rest of the slides.
I think you'll hopefully answer it next, but what are the main barriers, and then how will the next administration support?
Okay, yeah. I'll try and pick that as I go. So just carrying on with.
Can I just pick, Kate? We've got a question on sizes quickly. Phil, can you look at that in the chat? It's about 50 homes, 100 homes. So I'll pass that to Phil. I've put it in the chat. Back to Kate. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, so just in terms of funding to date, we're now currently working on Strategic Innovation Fund Alpha. So that's with kind of quite a few of the partners under here. So Phil mentioned working with Salford University, so that's part of the SIF Alpha. We've also got Electricity North West leading that. We've got UK Power Networks have joined for the Alpha stage, and Northern Power Grid are still part of Alpha as well. And that, as Phil's kind of highlighted, that's all about the technical solution, the smart local energy system, and how that integrates with the local network and that planning approach. And then we're working on the local energy advice demonstrator. So that started in October last year and carries through till March 2025. So that's a really great chunk of funding. So it's actually got us Jenny, Clive, Lou and Joanne are working on the ground as energy advisors, energy champions, delivering energy advice and working with Centre for Energy Equality to further develop the Fairer Warmth app, to really kind of bespoke it for what we need, that kind of co-productive use, and then working on the app to develop that net zero Terrace Street pathway as well. So we're testing at the moment those kind of 8 campaigns. What interaction are we getting? How many people are downloading the app? And then we're getting this kind of evaluation done through CAG as well. So really useful data coming out of what we're actually doing right there. We've then got the Net Zero Living Pathfinder, which is starting hopefully beginning of February. And that's all about the non-technical barriers. So this is through Rosendale Borough Council. And it's going to give us funding to look at the organisational and operational governance. So how do we contract people? What's the organisational governance? Where's the data flows? Where's the IP need to sit? How do we socially franchise this or license this to make sure that we're keeping redlined that community benefit? But it's also going to pay for a 3-house demonstrator, which is great, because it means that we'll have 2 homes that are going to have tenants in, but then 1 home we'll have as a show home as well. So really good focus to engage with the community. And we're also a big chunk of funding that goes to Bridgend. We're working with Bridgend County Council, in part because they worked with Phil on the Heat Pump Ready programme. And so they were already aware of what this type of model is and how they want to deploy it in their area. So key learning from that will be, what is the replication process? So how do they take the learning we've done and package that into a process and then apply it into their area? And then I've mentioned about the solar co-op as well. So other funding that we've actually put in for, so we put in a couple of weeks ago for Heat Pump Ready. So that would be, if we get that funding, it would be for a 10-house living lab. So that's really testing, would be putting the full physical infrastructure into 10 homes and then testing it with the virtual infrastructure. So mostly around the home energy management system, but we wouldn't be actually turning things on and off in people's homes. It would be kind of a Chinese wall stroke buffer. So we would say, right, at this moment, we would likely reduce your heat to 18 degrees. How do you feel about that? So it's kind of like a safe way of testing it. So we'd be doing the testing in the lab and then interfacing that with the real world. And we've also begun to be going for the Strategic Innovation Fund beta. So we're talking with ENWL at the moment about what that proposal will look like. But really that will be around developing the community energy management system and how all that smart system talks to each other and interfaces. So what software development do we need to do to get that whole kind of process packaged up so it can be replicable and scalable, not just for net zero Terrace street communities, but for other communities as well. And if we don't get the Heat Pump Ready funding, it is actually funding through DESNZ rather than through Innovate UK. So it will be a chance to really campaign DESNZ and say, okay, well, what's your plan? You know, there's 4 million terrace homes that are faced by this policy gap. They haven't got a route to decarbonise, and actually a lot of those homes are most likely to be people who are in fuel poverty, at risk of unhealthy homes. So I would look to, gather support for some kind of petition to DESNZ to say, actually, we need funding to deploy this. It's not just about Rossendale, it's about lots of other communities as well. So that kind of brings us on to next steps and working with new groups in new areas. So obviously, what are we trying to achieve? We've talked a lot about the model, etc., but it is about replication and scale. And how can we achieve that replication and scale? Well, we've got to prove the model. We've got to prove that it's affordable, low carbon energy, a healthy warm home at no upfront cost to consumer. And we're really doing that. We need to prove that out with 2 different facets. One's that demand creation. Can we show that people are interested in this offer? And if we can demonstrate that, then as I said to you earlier, Guy, actually we're creating demand, we're creating a new market. And that's what we've got to show the investors, that we are creating a new market because we are developing people into a market who want this solution. Because we're not going to get anywhere unless we can attract that patient capital as well. So we're really keen to work with new groups and local authorities to think about, okay, well, how can we take your learning from this project, add it to the learning that you've probably already done anyway, and the thoughts that you've already had in your area? How can we combine all that learning and look at what this looks like in new areas as well? So we can use the Pathfinder 2 process because we're going to be doing this with Bridgend. And as we work with Bridgend, it will help us as a group to go, right, okay, what have we done and how do we package that up into a process that is easily demonstrated or utilised in a new area. So I suggest that we can work with Bridgend through this Pathfinder, but also include anybody else who wants to be included in kind of regular catch-up calls. So they're always up to speed in what we're doing with Bridgend. So kind of shadowing what's happening with Bridgend, really. We want areas to start actually looking at their maps and going, okay, where are the substations? Where are our terrace streets? Where do we think this can be applied? So actually really properly mapping out new areas. And then ideally trying to use peer learning, because I'm aware that I'm really conscious that a lot of you have done a lot of work already in retrofit, in community engagement, energy efficiency advice, etc. So it's all about us all supporting each other to get to where we need to get to as fast as we can without reinventing the wheel, which is obviously, you know, resource waste. So we want to really kind of talk to you about, well, what's your thoughts on barriers? What do you think may work or may not work in your area? You know, can you see any red flags? And then the kind of next stage for us is we're writing this Strategic Innovation Fund beta bid, which has to be in on May the 22nd at 11 o'clock. And we're really hoping that some groups might be keen to be part of that application, to actually look at this community approach. So we hopefully get some funding through beta for those communities to go away and do kind of the community cold start approach, look at the 8 campaigns that we've done, work with the Fair and Warmth app and Centre for Energy Equality, and actually see what interest you get in your areas. So we're seeing whether we're creating that new demand and those clusters of new demand. And then adding that knowledge of how you do that and what's impactful, what's not, what ideas have you got that might add further impact, etc. So this is all about being kind of a co-productive process as opposed to a fixed, you know, us saying this is our methodology, you must use it, because it's not supposed to be like that. We want to kind of have this churn of new ideas as well. So what can we achieve collectively? So the point is that we want to show investors that we can create demand through this model. If you are interested and you want to work on SIF beta with us, the idea is that any of those new clusters of interest could then be the areas first to go once we do attract investment. It's an opportunity for you then to work with your DNO. We're already working, as I said, with Northern Power Grid, UK Power Networks. We're talking to the Project Leon, which was Project Leo, is now Project Leon. So that's a SIF Alpha with SSEN as well. And I'm keen to, we've got a call booked with them actually, Reece. So I don't know whether you're all involved in Project Leon, but really keen to show how this is a kind of a use case for Project Leon. So working with your DNO to show them what this process is and see whether they're interested in getting involved as well. And yeah, just trying to collectively uncover barriers and work through those collectively, you know, more, it's like hive mind approach. I'm a big believer that, you know, a hive mind is better than an individual mind. So let's all kind of gather together and try and find our way through and expand this coalition of the willing that we've got on how we actually get to this kind of model where we can decarbonise terrace homes. Okay, so how can we work with you? So I think I've already said, I'm just going to mute. I think Reece, it's you. Can you can you mute, please, Reece? It sounds delightful though. Yeah, so we want to continue to swap notes as we move through the Pathfinder 2. We kind of built up this process at startup, how we grow demand, how we collect data, what does the design stage look like, what's the deploy stage look like. It's going to be similar for every community, but it's going to be nuanced for every community. So we want to get your feedback on what you think those stages might look like in your community. Using the BridgeGen work to map that process and get feedback. We'd probably look to set up a shared folder, a shared Miro board, so we can capture ideas and learning as we go. If you'd like to be on beta, then can you let us know quite soon and we can work with you on what that would look like. And also, I mean, Guy and Adrian has certainly mentioned about shoehorning in other funding streams like Eco4, and we know that they're all quite geographically specific. So you know your ideas on how we can lever funding in to lower that standing charge, and actually how we can mobilise homes that have already got retrofit, for example, with shared ground loop through using other funding. And test the model, because basically fast, fail and mend is our philosophy. We've got to keep testing and make sure that we're picking up barriers as we go. Just a note, so we are working on an IP model, so there's obviously lots of learning. There's lots of replicable learning templates, models, and we want that to be owned by a community vehicle, which will take this learning and make sure it's kind of socially franchised or licensed to those who want to keep this model for community benefit. And that's something we have got legal support for in Pathfinder 2. But at some point, just to say that if you do want to be part of this, we probably would say to you, can you sign an MOU or something like that? But again, we can talk about that if you're interested in CIF beta. So just in conclusion, what we're trying to do is obviously try and create a model that's applicable to the hardest to treat stranded communities that don't currently have a route forward. We're trying to remove some of the complexity of engagement by using different processes, including the Fair Warmth app and the CRM system, and how that will support the process as we get to that decarbonisation end goal. It's keeping people along the journey as long as we can, as opposed to stop-start, being really conscious of engagement fatigue and survey fatigue as well. We want to have a model that can be started in communities that don't have a keen green environment group or whatever, or a local authority that's going to be delivering this. It's got to be no upfront cost, and we're using that funding methodology that's pinned to the infrastructure, not the home, repaid by a standing charge and not as pay as you save model. It's got to improve the quality of the housing stock. It's got to have that kind of healthy, warm home. We've got to integrate the community energy to get to that affordable energy point, overcoming that spark gap. And if the spark gap does disappear, it would be brilliant. But the local energy still would bring added benefits, which go, further lower bills as well. We're looking at Bake-Up as well, providing EV car access, because it's an area that, obviously there's no off-street parking, etc. So that is something that we're considering as well. And also it's got to be a model that can be operated in areas where there's electricity constraint as well. So that really talks about the smart local energy system. And it's there to support local authorities that just don't have the resource to help mobilise. So I think that's everything. So I think we've only got about 3 minutes left, but I think hopefully we picked up lots of questions on the way, Louise. I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, there are some questions in there which I've answered. So we're aiming for this to be grant free. Cara's put a note in about difficulty getting IP, as lots of other organisations like BHESCO doing this kind of work. Do you want to expand on the IP conversation?
Just
Cara,
to say,
also,
sorry,
how we recoup costs. Yeah, okay, well, Cara,
just in terms of IP,
yeah.
it's more about the community energy management system. So it's all the virtual infrastructure, Cara. That's where that sits.
Yep. So
it's not Cara, it's Kayla.
Oh, Kayla, sorry. Oh yeah, there's too many. Yeah, my brain's fried. Sorry, Kayla.
That's okay. No worries.
Yeah,
that's right. As long as it's all around the Fair Warmth app, which we're also helping to develop right as we speak. So we're working on that. I just think you need to be very careful about IP, because you certainly don't want to make it difficult for other groups to do this work.
No, absolutely. I mean, the whole point is this is scalable. So yeah, I know Andy and John are working with you guys and with Community Energy South. So we're all putting a lot of IP into the app. But I think the key is around the home energy management system, the community energy management system, and how that all interfaces as well. So we've got ongoing conversations with that, and we've got some legal expertise for Pathfinder 2 to help bottom that out. But yeah, we don't want it to be a barrier, Kayla. Absolutely.
Phil, do you want to say anything on that?
No, it's just I think that just, other than the point that the whole point of the IP structure that the partners are collectively working on is to protect the IP to permit communities to exploit it, if that makes sense. So what we're not trying to do is wrap the IP up into what's going to be a very commercialized model that's going to cost communities to run. So it's about protecting it for communities and then providing a toolkit that communities can then pick up and use. So that's the IP structure that we've developed under the CIF project.
So, and yeah, so more like a sort of cooperative kind of model, which can be put out and supported. So we've got some people saying thank you, and we're coming to the end of this. So I'd encourage you, if you want to come in on the CIF beta application as a fast follower, please let me or Kate know. I've put my email in there. I think we'll put Kate's in as well. Let's stay in touch. And I might send, if I can, I'll send the presentation around, but I will also make a feedback form just so that I can scoop up a bit more of your feedback. So I'll get that to you by, if tomorrow's Friday, hopefully the end of tomorrow, and if not, on Monday. But I'd like to say thank you to everyone. We've had a long session. Didn't give you a break, my apologies. And thank you for your active questions, and thanks so much to the presenters as well. We will try and save this recording, and then maybe we can put it on the private YouTube thingy. Kate knows how to do that. So yeah, and we know it's a challenge. Let's see how we all get on. So yeah, we'll wait for your feedback from the feedback form I sent around. Kate, do you want to say a goodbye?
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. Good to see you all, and look forward to catching up again soon.